My name is Alfie, and I have worked at Hendricks Hardware on Main Street in Winnipeg for 11 years. I arrived at the store every morning at 6 o'clock without fail, turned the key in the lock, and reset the alarm system before anyone else arrived. I knew every square inch of that building. I knew which shelves held the most dust, which floorboards creaked under certain weight, which corner of the storage room smelled of rust and old wood. My routine never varied. My life was predictable, and I preferred it that way. But in the autumn of 2019, something changed. A man began coming into the store. His name was Marcus Webb, and he owned the antique shop 3 blocks east on Portage Avenue. I knew Marcus from around town. He was in his late 60s, always impeccably dressed in threaded blazers despite the Manitoba cold, and he had lived in Winnipeg for approximately 23 years. He came into Hendricks Hardware every Wednesday without exception, always purchasing the same items: vintage door hinges, old brass locks, iron chains, and restoration supplies. His purchases were always meticulous, always specific. He would examine each item under the fluorescent lights, running his weathered fingers across the surfaces as if reading a language only he understood. I began to notice a pattern in his purchases by early October. The items grew darker in nature. He requested items designed for containment and security: heavy chains, padlocks that were no longer manufactured, iron bolts from the 1920s salvage bin. When I asked Marcus what project he was restoring, he smiled thinly and said nothing. He simply paid in cash and left the store with his bags held close to his chest. That same month, I attended the Winnipeg Community Center for a marketing conference. My coworker, Jenna, was also attending the event. During a lunch break, we sat in the cafeteria and Jenna mentioned that her cousin had been missing for 3 weeks. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and she had lived alone in a basement apartment near the University of Manitoba. She had simply vanished. No note, no explanation. Police found her apartment locked from the inside. Her car was still in the parking lot. Her phone was discovered on her bed, battery drained completely. The case had gone cold almost immediately. I felt uneasy hearing about Sarah's disappearance, but I did not make the connection to Marcus Webb until late November. I was organizing the salvage section of Hendricks Hardware when a customer mentioned a news story. A woman named Patricia Chen had been reported missing from her home on Grosvenor Avenue. Patricia lived alone. She was 42 years old and worked as a dental hygienist. She had failed to arrive at work on a Monday morning. When police conducted a welfare check, they found her apartment empty. Her dishes remained unwashed in the sink. Her coffee mug sat on the counter, half full, the liquid grown cold. She had vanished without a trace. Within 2 weeks, another disappearance was reported. David Hirsch, a 48-year-old accountant, had gone missing from his home on Wellington Crescent. His wife was out of the city visiting her mother. David had called her on Sunday evening and said he was going to watch the game and go to bed early. She returned home on Wednesday to find him gone. His wallet was on the nightstand. His keys hung by the door. His car remained in the garage. He had simply ceased to exist. I became obsessed. I began clipping the newspaper articles. I watched the local news religiously. By December, 5 people had disappeared from Winnipeg. All of them lived alone. All of them had been reported missing by people outside their immediate households. All of them had left their homes in a state suggesting they had stepped out momentarily and simply never returned. The police held press conferences. They theorized runaways despite the ages of the missing persons. They speculated about voluntary disappearances. They found no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, no fingerprints that did not belong, no forced entry points. I was stocking shelves when Marcus Webb entered Hendricks Hardware on the 3rd week of December. I watched him as he made his way to the back of the store where I kept the specialty salvage items. He selected a mirror that had been in stock since 1987. It was ornate, with a carved wooden frame depicting twisted faces and reaching hands. The mirror itself was spotty and discolored. Marcus examined it carefully, then turned to me and asked if I had anything older. Anything with history. Anything from before 1900. I retrieved a mirror from the storage room, a piece that had belonged to an estate sale from a Victorian home demolished in 1986. It was larger than the first mirror, the frame inlaid with what appeared to be mahogany antique. The glass was rippled, distorted, and seemed to shift in the light in ways that made my eyes water when I stared at it too long. Marcus studied this mirror for nearly 10 minutes without speaking. Then he purchased it without negotiating a price. I helped him carry the mirror to his car. As I watched him secure it in the back seat of his Lincoln Continental, I noticed something in the trunk. Furniture, old pieces, a bed frame, a dresser, items of furniture that appeared valuable but also appeared to be used to be lived upon. Marcus caught me looking. He closed the trunk deliberately and thanked me without warmth. He drove away, and I stood in the parking lot in the freezing cold, feeling something I could not yet name. I decided to walk past Marcus Webb's antique shop. It was a Wednesday evening, and I had closed the hardware store at 6 o'clock. The antique shop was located in an older section of Portage Avenue, in a building that dated to approximately 1912. The storefront windows were decorated with furniture and knickknacks, but the display had not changed in the 3 months I had been noticing Marcus. The same lamps, the same chairs, the same paintings. Nothing had sold, nothing had moved. I peered through the glass door. The interior of the shop was dark. A small light illuminated the back corner where a desk and chair sat beneath a portrait of someone I did not recognize. The walls were lined with cabinets and shelves containing items I could not quite make out in the darkness. On the floor, I noticed what appeared to be a trapdoor covered with an ornate rug. I had never noticed the trapdoor before. My obsession grew into something more consuming. I began researching Marcus Webb. I visited the library and searched property records. I learned that Marcus had purchased the antique shop building in 1996. Before that, the building had been vacant for 7 years. Prior to its vacancy, it had served as a storage facility. Prior to that, it had been a photography studio. Prior to that, it had been a residence. The property records stretched back to 1889. They showed multiple owners and multiple purposes. But one detail caught my attention. Between 1923 and 1947, the building had been owned by a man named Dr. Ernest Whitmore. Dr. Whitmore had been a physician and researcher. He had maintained a private practice in the basement of the building. The records did not specify what Dr. Whitmore had treated or researched, but newspapers from that era made vague references to his work with the mentally ill and the criminally deviant. I did not contact the police. I knew what they would say. I knew they would dismiss my suspicions as coincidence and speculation. Instead, I continued to monitor Marcus Webb. I began following him on his Wednesday shopping trips. I discovered that he no longer exclusively shopped at Hendrick's Hardware. He visited architectural salvage shops. He purchased items from estate sales. He collected items from demolition sites. But always, his purchases were the same category of objects. Always containment. Always security. Always objects designed to hold and restrain. On a Thursday evening in early January, I decided to investigate further. I told my supervisor that I was taking a personal day on Friday. I called in sick. Instead, I parked my truck 1 block away from Marcus Webb's antique shop. I waited in the darkness. At 11 o'clock at night, Marcus arrived. He parked his Lincoln in the alley behind the building. He unloaded several items from the trunk: a mirror, a vanity table, items that appeared to be furnishings. He disappeared into the building through a rear entrance. I waited for 2 hours. Lights appeared in the basement windows. I saw shadows moving. I heard sounds that I could not identify. Hammering, dragging, something that sounded like voices, though I could not make out words. At 1:30 in the morning, Marcus emerged from the building, locked the rear door, and drove away. I approached the building. The rear entrance was secured with a deadbolt that looked new, but the basement window was cracked open, slightly. I should not have looked inside. I should have called the police immediately, but I was consumed by need to understand. I pressed my face against the cold glass and peered into the basement. What I saw will remain with me for the rest of my life. The basement had been divided into separate rooms using new construction. Each room contained a bed. Each bed contained restraints. On the walls, I saw photographs. Photographs of the missing people. Sarah Mitchell, Patricia Chen, David Hirsch, two others I recognized from the news. The photographs were arranged chronologically. Some showed the missing person smiling. Some showed them in various states of distress. The most recent photographs showed them in the beds, restrained, still alive as far as I could determine from the angles and lighting. I ran from that building. I drove directly to the Winnipeg Police Service headquarters. I told them everything, every detail, every observation, every suspicion. The officer who took my statement listened patiently, then told me they would investigate. They told me not to leave town. They told me not to contact Marcus Webb or approach his property. At dawn, police executed a search warrant at Marcus Webb's antique shop. I learned the details from news reports over the following days. They found the basement exactly as I had described. They found the photographs. They found restraints and implements of torture. They found a detailed journal dating back 23 years, documenting the acquisition and maintenance of each victim. They found 5 bodies, 5 people in advanced states of decay, and they found 3 missing persons still alive in the secured basement rooms. The 3 survivors were hospitalized. They had been held between 3 and 8 months. They had been fed. They had been kept alive, but they had been subjected to sustained psychological and physical trauma. Marcus Webb was arrested and charged with 5 counts of murder and 3 counts of kidnapping. The investigation expanded. Police discovered that at least 7 other disappearances in Winnipeg over the past 2 decades bore similarities to Marcus Webb's confirmed crimes. The cold cases were reopened. The property records were examined more closely. Archaeologists and forensic specialists eventually excavated the ground beneath the antique shop. They discovered human remains dating back to the 1920s. At least 32 individuals had been buried in the basement soil over a period spanning nearly 100 years. The property itself seemed cursed. Generation after generation, the building attracted individuals with violent obsessions. Marcus Webb was simply the most recent in a long line of predators who had used the location for unspeakable purposes. I no longer work at Hendricks Hardware. I could not return after what I discovered in that basement. I could not face the items on the shelves without thinking of the chains and the restraints and the photographs on the walls. I moved to a different province. I changed my occupation. I try not to think about the basement, but every Wednesday night I lie awake. Every Wednesday night I wonder if I missed something. I wonder if there are still places I did not search. I wonder if the building that once contained so much suffering has attracted someone new, someone who has learned the secrets hidden beneath the soil, someone who understands the dark history embedded in those walls. The police reports state that Marcus Webb is serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole for 50 years. But I still receive strange packages in the mail. Packages with no return address. Packages containing old photographs. Photographs of my home. Photographs taken from angles I do not recognize. Photographs of me at specific moments from inside my house. And always, in the corner of each photograph, there is a shape, a shadow, a figure that looks exactly like the portrait I saw hanging on the wall inside Marcus Webb's antique shop. The portrait of someone I did not recognize, but I recognize him now. My name is Florence, and I moved to Clearwater Bay in northern Ontario during the spring of 2017. I had just finalized my divorce. My husband had been unfaithful, and I had spent the previous 18 months ensuring that the legal proceedings concluded with minimal emotional damage to myself. I was 34 years old, and I felt as though my life had been reset. I needed a place where no one knew my name. I needed distance from the city where I had built a life with someone who had betrayed me. I applied for a position as a middle school English teacher at Clearwater Bay Secondary School, and the position was offered to me within 2 weeks of my interview. Clearwater Bay sits on the northern shore of a lake that shares its name. The town population hovers around 2,000 people. The primary industry had been logging, but over the past 20 years, logging operations had diminished significantly. The town had attempted to reinvent itself as a tourist destination, capitalizing on the natural beauty of the lake and the surrounding boreal forest. Vacation homes had been constructed along the shoreline. A small marina operated during the summer months, but tourism remained inconsistent and seasonal. The permanent residents seemed to exist in a state of resigned decline, accepting that their town's best days had passed. My apartment was located on Mill Street, a residential avenue 3 blocks from the school where I taught. The landlord, a woman named Helen Prescott, rented me a second-floor unit in a converted Victorian house. The apartment was small but clean. Large windows overlooked the street, and in the distance, the water of Clearwater Lake. I moved into the apartment on June 1st. By the end of the week, I had arranged my furniture, organized my classroom materials, and begun to establish a routine. On my second Saturday in Clearwater Bay, I attended a community gathering at the town library. It was a casual social event designed to welcome new residents. I met other teachers, members of the town council, and various business owners. People were polite but reserved. They asked about my background and where I had moved from, but they did not press for details. I mentioned my divorce only in passing, and the subject was quickly changed. What struck me most profoundly was the way people reacted when I mentioned my apartment overlooking the lake. Their expressions shifted. Their eyes narrowed slightly. They offered polite congratulations on finding housing, but their congratulations carried an undertone I could not quite identify. One woman, whose name was Margaret, approached me after the official event had ended. She was approximately 60 years old, with gray hair and kind eyes that nonetheless conveyed a sense of deep worry. She told me that she had lived in Clearwater Bay for her entire life. She told me that my apartment was lovely, and she was certain I would enjoy the view. But then she added something that I dismissed at the time as small-town superstition. She told me that I should be careful near the lake at night. She told me that there were things that people in Clearwater Bay had learned to simply accept. She told me not to go to the water after sunset. When I asked her what she meant, she smiled sadly and said that some mysteries were better left undiscovered. I attributed Margaret's warning to local folklore. I'd read about the indigenous history of Northern Ontario. I understood that the land carried stories and traumas that had been absorbed into the landscape. I was willing to acknowledge that the lake likely held cultural significance that I, as an outsider, did not fully comprehend, but I was not willing to allow superstition to prevent me from enjoying the natural beauty of my new home. That summer was idyllic. I settled into my teaching position, preparing my curriculum, and organizing my classroom during the quiet weeks before the school year began. I made friends among the faculty. I began to understand the rhythms of the town. In the evenings, I would sit on my apartment balcony and watch the sun set over the lake. The water turned shades of amber and rose in deep purple as the light faded. The beauty of those sunsets was almost painful to witness, but I noticed something peculiar about my neighbors. I had 3 near neighbors in the converted Victorian house. The woman to my left, Mrs. Chen, worked as a nurse at the regional hospital. She seemed pleasant enough, though we rarely spoke. The man below me, a retired accountant named Robert, kept largely to himself, but both of them, without exception, locked their windows completely as soon as the sun began to set. They drew their curtains. They turned on lights throughout their apartments. I watched this ritual repeat every single evening, and I found it curious but did not question it. School began in September. I taught 8th grade English to approximately 90 students across 5 class periods. The students were typical of their age, somewhat surly and resistant to reading assignments. But I also noticed something unusual in their behavior. During lessons about Indigenous culture and history, several students became visibly uncomfortable. When I assigned reading that involved water or lakes or bodies of water, students asked if they could select alternative assignments. One girl, whose name was Emma, actually became physically ill during a discussion about Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, Song of Hiawatha, which references the Great Lakes. I began to ask my students direct questions. I asked them why they seemed so uncomfortable discussing water. I asked them if there was something specific to Clearwater Bay that I should understand. At first, they refused to answer. They exchanged glances with one another, but gradually they opened up. They told me about the people they called the Walking Ones. These were individuals who emerged from the lake at night. They walked through the town. They appeared to be human, but they moved in ways that did not quite match human movement. Their joints seemed to bend in wrong directions. Their heads tilted at angles that human necks could not achieve. They wore clothing from different eras, but the clothing was always wet and always deteriorating. The students told me that the Walking Ones emerged from the water approximately once per week, though the night of emergence was unpredictable. When they emerged, they would walk through the streets of the town for hours. They would move from house to house, peering through windows. Sometimes they would simply vanish when they reached a particular residence, but sometimes they would attempt to enter a building. The townspeople had learned to keep their doors locked and their windows secured when the Walking Ones were abroad. I dismissed these stories as folklore spread among teenagers. I assumed it was a form of urban legend, a hazing ritual designed to frighten new residents. But then, in late September, several of my students mentioned that a Walking One had been spotted the previous night. They described it in clinical detail. It had emerged from the lake at approximately 11 o'clock in the evening. It had walked down Mill Street. It had paused at several houses. It had approached my building and stood beneath the second-floor windows, looking up for nearly 30 minutes before moving on. My apartment. The students were describing someone or something that had come to my home. That night, I locked every window in my apartment. I drew my curtains. I turned on lights in every room, and I sat in my bedroom, watching the darkness outside, wondering if I was a participant in a collective delusion, or if I was genuinely in danger from something I could not fully comprehend. Over the following weeks, I became obsessed with understanding the Walking Ones. I visited the town library and spoke with Margaret, who worked there as a volunteer librarian. She confirmed everything the students had told me. The Walking Ones had been emerging from Clearwater Lake for as long as anyone could remember. The earliest documented reference to them dated back to 1947, when a local newspaper had published a brief article about strange figures seen moving through the town at night. The article had been dismissed as a hoax, but Margaret showed me something more compelling. She opened a physical ledger maintained by the library. It was a record of missing persons from the Clearwater Bay area dating back to 1923. The names were accompanied by dates and brief descriptions. Between 1923 and the present day, exactly 53 individuals had disappeared from Clearwater Bay. All of them had disappeared during the summer or autumn months. All of them had vanished without explanation. All of them had been residents who lived within sight of the lake. I studied the list obsessively. I began to notice a pattern in the missing persons reports. They did not appear randomly throughout the decades. They appeared in clusters. 3 disappearances in 1923, none in 1924 or 1925. 5 disappearances in 1926, none in 1927. The pattern suggested something cyclical, something that occurred on an irregular but deliberate schedule. Margaret told me something else. She told me that the townspeople had learned to manage the presence of the walking ones by simply accepting them as a fact of life. Most people never encountered them directly. Those who did encounter them reported that the walking ones were searching for something. They seemed to move with purpose. They seemed to be looking for specific people in specific houses. When they found what they were searching for, the individual would vanish from their home. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, simply gone. I asked Margaret if the townspeople had ever contacted authorities. She laughed, but not unkindly. She explained that the provincial police had investigated the disappearances numerous times. They found no evidence of foul play. They found no bodies. They found no witnesses to any crimes. They eventually dismissed the disappearances as voluntary relocations or suicides. The authorities concluded that Clearwater Bay was simply a place where people chose to leave for reasons they did not articulate. But Margaret's eyes told a different story. Margaret knew something more. She knew that the walking ones were not random. She knew that they were searching for specific individuals. And she knew that the people they found did not choose to leave. They were taken. Winter arrived. The lake froze solid. The walking ones did not emerge from the frozen water. The town relaxed into a state of temporary safety. I had begun to settle into my life in Clearwater Bay. I had made friends. I enjoyed my teaching. I had started to forget the fear that had gripped me in the autumn. But in mid-March, as the ice began to crack and the water beneath returned to liquid form, I received a package at my apartment. It contained a single item, a photograph. The photograph showed me standing on my apartment balcony. I was wearing a dress I had purchased during my first week in town. The photograph had been taken from the street looking upward. It showed me clearly, unmistakably, and written across the bottom in water-damaged ink were words that made my blood freeze. The words read, "We see you. We are waiting. Spring brings hunger." I brought the photograph to Margaret at the library. I showed her the image and asked her how it was possible. How could someone have photographed me without my knowledge? How could they have obtained my address? Margaret studied the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at me with profound sadness. She told me that the walking ones do not simply search randomly. They seem to have knowledge. They seem to know who lives where. They seem to understand the geography of the town and the identities of the residents. She told me something else. She told me that sometimes the walking ones return to the same location repeatedly. Sometimes they focus their attention on one particular house or one particular person. When that happens, it is not a matter of if that person will disappear. It is only a matter of when. I left Clearwater Bay that night. I packed my belongings hurriedly and drove south toward Toronto. I called the school and claimed a family emergency required my immediate departure. I did not provide details. I drove through the night. I did not stop until I had reached the city. But the photographs continue to arrive. I have received 5 of them since I fled Clearwater Bay. Each photograph shows me in a different location. Each photograph shows me unaware that I'm being observed. Each photograph has been taken from impossible angles and impossible distances. And each photograph contains the same message, written in that same water-damaged script. We are waiting. We remember. We will find you. The most recent photograph arrived 3 days ago. It showed me standing in my kitchen in Toronto. The photograph was taken from inside my apartment, from directly behind my left shoulder. I was making tea. I did not hear anyone enter my home. I did not see anyone in my apartment. Last night, I locked my windows. I drew my curtains. I turned on every light, and I sat in my bedroom, listening to the sounds of the city, knowing that something from the frozen depths of Clearwater Lake has followed me here. Something has learned my location. Something is waiting for me to make a single mistake. Something is hungry, and it remembers my name. My name is Archie, and I've worked at the grain elevator in Coldhaven, Saskatchewan, for the past 16 years. Coldhaven is a farming community located in the Central Prairie region of the province, approximately 140 kilometers from the nearest city. The population of the town is approximately 850 people. Most of them are farmers or work in agriculture-related industries. The landscape surrounding Coldhaven is almost entirely flat. Wheat fields extend in all directions until they merge with the horizon. There are no significant geographical features, no mountains, no forests, just endless waves of golden grain under the enormous prairie sky. The grain elevator where I work rises 230 feet above the surrounding landscape. It serves as the collection and distribution point for grain harvested from the surrounding farms. Farmers deliver their wheat and canola to the facility. The grain is processed and stored in massive silos before being shipped by rail to distribution centers further east. My responsibilities include monitoring the storage systems, managing inventory, and overseeing the loading and unloading operations. I know the facility intimately. I can navigate it in complete darkness. I have walked across the surrounding fields hundreds of times. In October of 2013, something changed in those fields. I was conducting a routine inventory inspection one evening when I noticed something unusual in the western field adjacent to the grain elevator. It was approximately 7 o'clock in the evening. The sun had recently set, and darkness was settling over the prairie. I was completing a final walkthrough of the storage tanks when I observed a pattern of lights in the western field. The lights appeared to be approximately half a mile away. They were stationary. They did not move. They did not pulse or flicker. They simply remained in a fixed position, glowing with a soft luminescence that did not resemble any conventional light source I could identify. I reported what I had observed to my supervisor, a man named Donald, who had worked at the grain elevator for 23 years. Donald was skeptical. He told me that I had likely seen a vehicle or a flashlight from a neighboring farm. He told me not to concern myself with matters unrelated to my work. I accepted his dismissal and did not mention the lights again, but I could not stop thinking about them. That night, I drove out to the western field and investigated. I found nothing, no vehicle, no equipment, no evidence that anyone had been in the field. The field appeared completely undisturbed. October of 2013 became November of 2013, and October 12th arrived. I was working the evening shift. At approximately 9 o'clock, I observed the lights again in the exact same location in the western field. They appeared identical to the previous occurrence. Same luminescence, same stationary position, same unsettling quality that made the hair on my neck stand at attention. I conducted a more thorough investigation this time. I walked into the field toward the lights. As I approached, I noticed something that made me stop completely. The grain in the field had been arranged in a pattern, not a random pattern, a deliberate geometric arrangement. The stalks of wheat had been pressed into the earth in a way that created a massive circular design visible only from an elevated perspective. The pattern was approximately 300 feet in diameter. It contained a series of concentric circles with precise geometric shapes radiating from a central point. The lights vanished as I approached. They simply ceased to exist. I stood in the field for nearly an hour, examining the pattern more closely. The pressed wheat had been flattened with tremendous force. The stalks were not broken or damaged. They were simply bent as if by something of immense weight moving across them in a deliberate manner. I measured the precision of the pattern. Every angle was exact. Every circle was mathematically perfect. No human activity could have created such a precise arrangement. I reported the crop circle to the local RCMP detachment. The officer who took my report seemed uninterested. He asked if I had consumed alcohol that evening. He suggested that I had likely misinterpreted natural crop damage caused by wind or weather. He took no action. He filed no report. but I could not move forward from what I had witnessed. I began keeping detailed records. I created a journal documenting every occurrence. I installed a video camera on the roof of the grain elevator and directed it toward the western field. On October 12th of 2014, exactly 1 year after the first incident, the lights appeared again in precisely the same location. This time, I was prepared. I recorded the entire event on video. The lights hovered for approximately 3 hours. Then they vanished. I checked the field the next morning and found another crop circle, this one even more elaborate than the first. It contained 7 concentric circles, with intricate mathematical symbols I did not recognize arranged throughout the pattern. I became obsessed with understanding the phenomenon. I researched crop circles. I learned that they had been reported in locations across North America for decades. Most were dismissed as hoaxes, but some remained unexplained. I discovered that there were individuals who studied crop circles professionally. I contacted one such researcher, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen from British Columbia. I sent her photographs of my crop circles. She responded within days. She told me that my circles exhibited characteristics that could not be replicated by human means. The precision, the mathematical consistency, the electromagnetic disturbances detected in the soil samples I had collected. Dr. Chen revealed something else. She told me that crop circles often appeared in clusters according to specific geographical patterns. She told me that previous researchers had identified nodes of circle activity, locations where crop circles appeared with regularity. She told me that Coldhaven, Saskatchewan, appeared on historical records as one such node. She said that circles had been reported in the surrounding area dating back to at least 1952. The records were sparse and fragmentary, but the pattern was clear. Every 13 years, circles appeared in the vicinity of Coldhaven. The most recent occurrence before my sighting had been in 2001. The occurrence before that had been in 1988. I asked Dr. Chen what she believed was causing the phenomenon. She was hesitant to answer. She told me that after decades of research, she had developed certain theories. She believed that the crop circles were not random acts. She believed they were communications or markers of some kind. She believed they were created by something with intelligence and technology far beyond our understanding. She told me that she could not prove any of this. She told me that governments had quietly invested significant resources in studying crop circles, but had maintained absolute secrecy about their findings. The year 2014 moved into 2015. I continued to keep my records. On October 12th of 2015, the lights appeared again. I now had a 3-year consecutive pattern of sightings on the exact same date. I recorded the entire event. I collected soil samples. I documented the resulting crop circle, which was significantly larger than the previous two and far more intricate in its mathematical patterns. But something changed in 2015. For the first time since I began my observations, I noticed other manifestations of the phenomenon. The animals in the area exhibited unusual behavior. Cattle from neighboring farms appeared agitated. Some animals refused to enter the western field at all. Birds seemed to avoid the area entirely. And I noticed something else. Electronic devices in my possession began to malfunction. My camera developed faults. The video equipment malfunctioned. My watch began running at irregular speeds. My truck's electrical systems failed repeatedly. It was as if electromagnetic interference was affecting every electronic device in proximity to the crop circle sites. Then, in October of 2016, something more disturbing occurred. I was monitoring the field on the night of October 12th. The lights appeared, as expected. I recorded the sighting. I watched as the pattern began to form. But this time, the phenomenon lasted longer than previous occurrences. The lights remained visible for nearly 6 hours, and during that entire time, I experienced something that I still cannot adequately describe. I was standing in the grain elevator control room watching the field through a window. I became aware of a presence, not a physical presence, a presence in my mind, a consciousness that seemed to be observing me. I felt as though something was examining my thoughts. I felt as though something was assessing me, evaluating me, determining something about me based on criteria I could not comprehend. The experience lasted for approximately 30 minutes. During that time, I could not move. I could not speak. I could only stand and be observed. When the sensation ceased, I was exhausted. I had lost 8 hours of time. My watch showed that it was 6 in the morning, but I had no memory of the passing hours. I had no recollection of how I had remained standing in the control room for 8 consecutive hours without moving. I checked the video equipment and discovered that the recording had ceased at precisely the moment when I felt the presence enter my consciousness. The camera had simply stopped functioning. I visited a hospital and underwent a complete medical examination. The doctors found nothing abnormal. All my vital signs were normal. All blood work came back normal. All neurological tests indicated normal brain function. But I had lost 8 hours of my life. I had experienced something that my conscious mind could not account for. Dr. Chen suggested that I had experienced a form of missing time commonly associated with anomalous phenomena. She told me that this was not uncommon in individuals who lived in close proximity to crop circle sites. She told me that I should consider relocating away from Coldhaven. She told me that the phenomenon seemed to be intensifying with each occurrence. I did not heed her warning. I remained in Coldhaven. I continued my observations. October 12th arrived again in 2017. I was prepared. I had new equipment, better cameras, recording devices specifically designed to capture phenomena in the electromagnetic spectrum. I documented everything that occurred that night. What I observed changed my understanding of reality. The lights did not simply appear in the field. I watched as they emerged from beneath the surface of the earth. They rose slowly from the ground, like something ascending from underground. As they rose higher, I could perceive a shape, an object, something geometric and vast. The object rose approximately 300 feet into the air above the field. It remained suspended for nearly 4 minutes. Then it descended back into the earth, and the lights ceased to exist. I've kept all of this secret. I have not shared the recordings with anyone except Dr. Chen. I have continued to work at the grain elevator. I have continued to monitor the field on October 12th every year since 2013. The phenomenon continues to occur with absolute regularity. The pattern in the grass continues to be generated. And every October 12th, I stand in that control room and feel that presence return. That consciousness examining my thoughts. That intelligence assessing me. 2 months ago, I received a package in the mail. It contained a single photograph. The photograph showed me standing in the western field. I was wearing clothes I have never owned. The photograph appeared to be taken from a vantage point high above the field, perhaps from several hundred feet in the air. The image showed me smiling. My face showed an expression of peace and acceptance that I do not recognize as my own. Behind me, in the background of the photograph, I could see the outline of something vast, something ascending from beneath the earth, something that resembled the object I had observed rising from the ground on October 12th of 2017. The handwriting on the back of the photograph read, "You have been chosen. October 12th is approaching. We are waiting. You will understand soon." I do not know what I have been chosen for. I do not know what will occur on the next October 12th, but I know that I will stand in the grain elevator control room and watch the field. I know that I will feel that presence return, and I know that this time I may not return from that experience the way I have returned in previous years. The pattern in the grass is not a message. It is a marker. It is a calling, and I am afraid that I am the one being called. My name is Millie, and I hold a master's degree in marine biology from the University of British Columbia. I have spent the past 8 years studying the water systems of coastal Nova Scotia, specifically the ecosystem of Devil's Cove, a deep water formation located off the northern coast near the town of Marguerite. My research focuses on the interactions between freshwater aquifers and saltwater intrusion. I examine the geological formations beneath the ocean floor to understand how these systems have evolved over millennia. I have published 3 peer-reviewed papers on my findings. I have received grants from the Canadian government and from private research institutions. My career has been dedicated to understanding the waters that surround this region. But I have discovered something that my academic training did not prepare me to comprehend. In the summer of 2018, I was conducting a routine dive survey of the underwater cave network that exists beneath Devil's Cove. The cave system is one of the most geologically significant features of the Nova Scotia coastline. It contains evidence of tidal flows dating back 20,000 years. The caves have been the subject of intermittent study for the past 50 years. Most of my colleagues considered them thoroughly explored and well documented. I disagreed. I believed there were sections of the system that remained unexplored and that could yield valuable information about the region's hydrological history. My dive partner for that particular expedition was a professional marine geologist named Dr. Michael Haskins. Michael had worked in the field for 22 years. He was cautious and meticulous. He understood the dangers of deep water diving in unexplored cave systems. We had completed 7 successful survey dives together over the previous year. We had never experienced any significant complications. We followed all safety protocols. We maintained constant communication through our dive computers. We had backup systems in place for all critical equipment. The dive began at dawn on June 15, 2018. We entered the water from a research vessel anchored approximately 300 meters from the cave entrance. We descended through the blue-green water toward the cave mouth. The depth was approximately 120 feet. Our equipment was functioning normally. Our air supply was adequate. We proceeded into the cave system with deliberate, measured movements. Michael and I had planned to survey the western branch of the cave system, a section that previous researchers had documented but not thoroughly explored. We swam through passages that became progressively narrower as we descended deeper into the rock formations. The water temperature dropped. The light from the surface became progressively dimmer until we relied entirely on the lights attached to our diving equipment. Approximately 2 hours into the dive, Michael signaled me to examine something unusual on the cave wall. I swam toward him and observed what appeared to be a man-made opening carved into the rock face. The opening was approximately 3 feet in height and 2 feet in width. It did not appear to be a natural formation. The edges were too regular. The depth suggested intentional excavation. I signaled my understanding to Michael, and we both documented the opening with our underwater cameras. Michael decided to explore the opening further. I advised caution. The opening was small, and our diving equipment was bulky. If either of us became trapped, extraction would be extremely difficult or impossible. Michael acknowledged my concern, but proceeded into the opening slowly and carefully. I maintained position outside the opening, monitoring Michael's progress through his air bubbles and light emissions. Michael entered the opening. The light from his diving torch became progressively fainter as he moved deeper into the narrow passage. I waited, counting the seconds, maintaining my proximity to the opening. Then, after approximately 90 seconds, Michael's signal light began to flash frantically. This was the emergency signal. I moved toward the opening immediately, preparing to enter if Michael required assistance. Michael emerged from the opening quite suddenly, his movements erratic and his breathing heavy. His air consumption was elevated. His eyes showed signs of panic. He signaled that we needed to exit the cave system immediately and ascend to the surface. I followed his direction without question. We swam rapidly through the cave passages, moving with far less caution than our normal protocol demanded. We reached the cave entrance and began our ascent toward the surface. Due to our rapid movement, we had to take several decompression stops to avoid the bends. At each stop, I asked Michael what he had encountered in the narrow passage. He refused to answer. He simply remained silent, his face pale behind his diving mask, his eyes fixed on the distance. When we reached the surface, Michael removed his diving mask, and I could see that his hands were trembling. He climbed aboard the research vessel without speaking. He remained on the vessel while I debriefed with the technical support crew about the dive. Michael went directly to the cabin and locked himself inside. That evening, I attempted to speak with Michael about what had frightened him so severely in the narrow cave passage. He initially refused to discuss the matter, but after several hours of persistent questioning, he finally spoke. He told me that he had entered the passage and swum approximately 20 feet into the narrow opening. Then, the passage had opened into a much larger chamber, a vast chamber that seemed impossible to exist within the geological structure we understood the cave system to possess. And in that chamber, Michael had seen something that terrified him. He had seen bodies, multiple human remains arranged in deliberate formations on the chamber floor. The bodies were in various states of decomposition. Some appeared relatively recent. Others appeared to be skeletal remains that had been exposed to the elements for years or decades. Michael had swum closer to examine them. He had discovered that the bodies bore evidence of trauma. Some bore signs of blunt force. Others bore marks that suggested constraint and prolonged confinement. Michael had also observed something else. Among the remains, he had found objects, personal effects, identification documents, items of clothing bearing tags and labels that indicated they originated from different countries and different time periods. He had seen a passport dated 1985 in the water next to a skeletal remains. He had seen a wedding ring bearing an inscription dated 2003. He had seen evidence of human activity that suggested the chamber had been used for something systematic, something intentional, something horrifying. Michael had turned around and fled the chamber. He had swum rapidly back through the narrow passage and signaled his emergency status. He had not wanted to explore further. He had not wanted to document what he had discovered. He had only wanted to leave that place and never return. I contacted the RCMP and reported what Michael had described. I provided them with exact coordinates of the cave location. I explained the discovery of what appeared to be human remains within an underwater chamber. The police took my statement seriously. They contacted the local Coast Guard. They initiated an investigation into the matter, but complications emerged immediately. The dive location was within contested territorial waters. There were jurisdictional questions about which authorities had the right to investigate. The depth of the cave and the difficulty of accessing the chamber made exploration challenging. And when authorities finally organized an expedition to examine the cave system, they found something unexpected. The narrow passage that Michael had entered no longer existed. The cave wall was solid. There was no opening. There was no passage leading to any concealed chamber. The geological formation appeared unchanged. The opening that Michael had observed was gone, as if it had never existed at all. The RCMP concluded that Michael had either fabricated the story or that he had experienced a form of hallucination or disorientation common to deep-water divers. They closed the investigation. They suggested that I disregard Michael's account as the product of nitrogen narcosis or other dive-induced psychological phenomena. Michael left Nova Scotia shortly after the investigation concluded. He took a position with a research institution in Australia. I have not heard from him since. He did not respond to my emails or calls, but I have continued to investigate the cave system on my own. I have conducted multiple survey dives into the underwater caves. I have attempted to relocate the narrow passage that Michael described. I have found no evidence of such a passage, but I have found other things. I have found scratches on the cave walls that appear to be claw marks. I have found areas of the cave floor where sediment has been disturbed as if by purposeful excavation or movement. I have found objects on the cave floor that do not belong to the natural environment. I have found remnants of rope. I have found fragments of bone that have been cut and processed in ways that suggest deliberate handling. 2 months ago, someone broke into my laboratory at the university. They did not steal any equipment. They did not damage any of my research materials, but they accessed my computer files. They accessed my photographs from the cave surveys. They left behind a single message written in marker on my desk. Some waters should remain undisturbed. Stop looking. Stop asking. Or you will understand what Michael understood. I have stopped my research in the Devil's Cove system. I have moved my focus to other coastal regions. But I continue to receive packages in the mail. Each package contains a single item. The first package contained a photograph of my apartment taken from the water at night. The second package contained a wedding ring that does not belong to me, bearing an inscription dated 2003. The third package contained a passport dated 1985, the same passport that Michael had described seeing in the underwater chamber. Last week, I received another package. It contained a detailed map of the cave system with specific locations marked and labeled. Locations that I have never visited. Locations that do not appear on any official maps or surveys. The markings on the map corresponded to what Michael had described as the hidden chamber, containing multiple human remains. And beneath each marked location, there was a name written in that same water-damaged script. Names of missing persons from across Canada. Names dating back to 1945. At least 53 names. All of them disappeared. All of them listed as missing but never found. All of them apparently connected to the underwater caves off the coast of Nova Scotia. I have sent copies of this map to the authorities. I have provided them with comprehensive documentation of everything I have discovered. But nothing has been done. The RCMP has not initiated a new investigation. The Coast Guard has not organized an expedition. The academic institutions have not expressed interest in studying the cave system further. I have realized that someone or something is preventing the investigation of those underwater caves. I have realized that the discovery Michael made was significant enough that powerful forces have worked to suppress the information. And I have realized that my continued existence depends on my willingness to remain silent. So I remain silent. But I know the truth about those caves. I know that beneath the dark waters off the Nova Scotia coast, there is a chamber filled with remains. I know that those remains span decades. I know that something has been using those caves as a repository for bodies for longer than modern Canada has existed. And I know that the waters will never release their secrets, because something in those depths is determined to keep them hidden forever. My name is Isaac, and I have worked as a customs officer at the Cowansville border crossing for the past 19 years. The crossing is one of several ports of entry between Quebec and the United States, specifically between the Canadian province and Vermont. It is a relatively quiet crossing compared to the larger border facilities. Approximately 200 to 400 vehicles pass through daily, depending on the season and day of the week. My responsibilities include inspecting vehicles, reviewing documentation, and managing the flow of traffic between the two countries. I have always taken my position seriously. I understand that the border crossing is a critical point in the regulation of cross-border movement. I am trained to identify suspicious behavior, to recognize patterns of activity that suggest illicit commerce, and to make judgments about which vehicles require detailed inspection. In 19 years, I have developed an intuitive sense for when something is wrong. I can look at a driver and know when they are lying. I can observe a vehicle and recognize when something is not aligned with the official documentation. In the spring of 2016, I began to notice something unusual. A specific vehicle, a white panel van with Vermont registration, began crossing the border at regular intervals. The driver was a man approximately 50 years old with graying hair and an unmemorable face. The van's registration showed that it was owned by a rental company in Burlington, Vermont. The driver always presented valid documentation. The vehicle carried legitimate cargo on every crossing I observed. The manifest documented the transport of commercial goods from Vermont to Quebec, but something about the pattern troubled me. The van crossed the border exactly twice per week, without fail, on Tuesdays and Saturdays. The crossings occurred at precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The driver crossed in both directions with identical consistency. The cargo documentation was always in perfect order, though I noticed the cargo descriptions changed frequently. One week, the manifest listed agricultural equipment. The next week, it listed office supplies. The documentation was always genuine, always properly notarized, always entirely legitimate. I mentioned my observations to my supervisor, a woman named Catherine, who had been working at the border crossing for 23 years. Catherine listened to my concerns but expressed skepticism. She told me that consistent schedules were not uncommon for legitimate commercial operations. She told me that the rental company frequently rented to small business operators who maintained regular routes between the two countries. She told me not to create international incidents based on intuition. She told me to focus on following the established protocols. I accepted her guidance and did not pursue the matter further with official channels. But I began documenting the van's crossings, privately. I recorded the dates, times, and manifest information. I noted the driver's behavior and demeanor. I observed that the driver never made eye contact. He never spoke beyond what was absolutely necessary. He never smiled or engaged in any casual conversation with the customs officers. He presented his documents and waited with an expression of complete neutrality. After approximately 2 months of observation, I noticed something else. On one Tuesday crossing, I observed the van's cargo area through my inspection window. The manifest stated that the vehicle was transporting computer components, but through the small window, I could see what appeared to be metal containers. The containers looked like they were designed for containment. They were secured with heavy-duty locking mechanisms. I made a note of this discrepancy. I requested to conduct a more detailed inspection of the vehicle. The driver did not object. He unlocked the cargo area and allowed me to examine the contents. The metal containers were present, but they were completely sealed. The driver explained that the containers held sensitive electronic equipment that required secure transport. He provided documentation from the receiving company that confirmed the shipment. Everything was technically in order, but I could not explain why the containers were so heavily secured. I could not explain why they contained small ventilation holes. I could not explain why I thought I heard movement from inside one of the containers, a sound like breathing or shifting weight. I documented my concerns in my personal notes, but did not file an official report. I continued to observe the van's crossings for the next several months. The pattern remained consistent. The driver never deviated from his schedule. The vehicle never appeared to contain anything obviously suspicious, but my instincts screamed that something was wrong. In the autumn of 2016, I made a decision that violated my professional protocols. I decided to follow the van after it crossed the border into Quebec. I was not authorized to leave my post. I should have filed a formal complaint through official channels, but I was compelled by something deeper than professional responsibility. I was compelled by the certainty that I was observing something significant. I arranged with a colleague to cover my station for a brief period. Then I followed the white van as it drove away from the border crossing. The van traveled north on Route 139, moving away from the border region toward more rural areas of Quebec. I maintained a distance, staying several car lengths behind, trying to avoid detection. The van traveled for approximately 40 kilometers before it turned onto a secondary road. Then it turned again onto a gravel access road that led deep into a forested area. I slowed my vehicle and observed from a distance as the van approached an old farmhouse set far back from the main road. The property was surrounded by dense forest. It appeared abandoned. The farmhouse was dilapidated, and the surrounding land was overgrown. The van parked in front of the farmhouse. The driver exited the vehicle and walked toward the house. He carried one of the metal containers. I waited, watching from the shelter of the forest. After approximately 5 minutes, the driver emerged from the farmhouse without the container. He returned to the van. He drove back the way he had come, returning toward the border crossing. I did not follow him further. Instead, I approached the farmhouse on foot, moving carefully through the overgrown landscape. I approached a window and peered inside. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. The interior of the farmhouse had been heavily modified. Walls had been constructed to create separate compartments. Lighting fixtures had been installed throughout. And in the compartments, I could see cages. Metal cages, some of them occupied. I could see people inside the cages. At least 4 individuals were visible through the window. They appeared to be restrained. They appeared to be in distress. I stepped back from the window and pulled out my phone to call the authorities. But before I could dial, I heard a voice behind me. A calm, measured voice that spoke with absolute certainty. The voice said, "You should not have followed us." I turned to see the driver of the van standing approximately 10 feet away. Behind him were 3 other men. All of them wore expressions of complete detachment. All of them seemed utterly unmoved by the fact that I had discovered their operation. I ran. I ran through the forest, moving without direction, only knowing that I needed to escape. I heard footsteps behind me, but I did not look back. I crashed through undergrowth and over uneven terrain. My phone was lost during the escape. I did not know which direction I was moving. I only knew that I needed to reach a populated area, a place where I could contact authorities. I emerged from the forest along a secondary highway approximately 2 hours after beginning my escape. A passing truck stopped, and the driver, a woman named Susan, offered me assistance. She drove me to a hospital in St. Hyacinthe. I was treated for exposure and abrasions. Then I contacted the provincial police. The police took my statement seriously. They organized a search of the farmhouse and the surrounding property. But when they arrived at the location I had identified, they found nothing. The farmhouse was empty. The cages were gone. The modifications to the interior had been removed. The property appeared abandoned and showed no signs of recent human activity. The police searched the property thoroughly and found no evidence of the operation I had described. I was viewed with suspicion. The police suggested that I had experienced a psychological episode or hallucination induced by the stress of my work. They suggested that I had fabricated the story. They noted that I had abandoned my post without authorization. They recommended that I seek psychological evaluation. I returned to work at the border crossing, but my credibility had been damaged. My supervisor treated me with cautious skepticism. My colleagues spoke to me only when absolutely necessary. I was eventually reassigned to a different position at a different border facility, but the van never crossed the border again. The driver disappeared. The pattern of consistent Tuesday and Saturday crossings ceased entirely. 3 weeks ago, I received a package in the mail. It contained a single photograph. The photograph showed the interior of the farmhouse, the cages clearly visible, occupied by individuals I did not recognize. The photograph was dated 4 days after my escape from the property. Handwritten on the back of the photograph was a single sentence. "You saw something you should not have seen. We have been monitoring you since." I have received 3 additional packages in the past 3 weeks. Each one contains a photograph. Each photograph shows a different location. A parking lot where I park my car, the grocery store where I shop, my apartment building, my apartment window. Each photograph contains the same message. Each photograph makes clear that I am being watched continuously. I have attempted to involve the authorities again, but I have no physical evidence of anything. I have only a series of photographs and a story that was already dismissed as a psychological episode. The authorities will not take further action based on the photographs alone. I no longer report to my position at the border crossing. I'm on medical leave pending a psychological evaluation, but I know the truth about what I saw in that farmhouse. I know that human trafficking is occurring across the border. I know that people are being transported and imprisoned. I know that the operation is organized and deliberate. And I know that the people responsible for that operation will never be brought to justice, because I was the only witness, and my credibility has been systematically destroyed. I wonder sometimes if destroying my credibility was part of their plan. I wonder if they anticipated that I would follow the van. I wonder if they wanted me to see enough to become frightened, but not enough to convince anyone else. What I know with absolute certainty is that I see that white van, sometimes, in my dreams. I see it crossing the border, again and again, forever, carrying its cargo of captive human beings into a darkness that official channels refuse to acknowledge exists. My name is Ruby, and I have been a search and rescue volunteer in the British Columbia interior for 12 years. I work with a coordinated team of 37 volunteers who cover an area of approximately 8,000 square kilometers of mountainous terrain. The team responds to emergency calls from hikers, climbers, and travelers who become lost or injured in the wilderness surrounding the towns of Golden and Field. I have participated in 163 rescue operations over the course of my service. I have saved lives. I have recovered bodies. I have learned to understand the mountains and the risks they present to unprepared adventurers. But I have also learned that the mountains are not always bound by the laws of nature as I understand them. In the summer of 2019, the first incident occurred. A man named David Caldwell, a 42-year-old experienced hiker, departed from a trailhead near the Takakau Falls region on a solo hiking expedition. He had informed his wife that he planned to return by evening. When he did not arrive home by nightfall, his wife contacted search and rescue. Our team was mobilized. We conducted a grid search of the area where David had been hiking. We found his vehicle still parked at the trailhead. We found his backpack along the trail approximately 3 kilometers from the trailhead. But we found no sign of David himself. The search continued for 3 days. We expanded our grid. We brought in tracking dogs. We surveyed the area from helicopter. We found nothing. No clothing, no equipment, no body, no evidence that indicated what had happened to David Caldwell. He simply vanished. Over the following year, additional hikers disappeared from similar locations in the mountain region. Maria Gonzalez, a 38-year-old woman who was hiking in the area of Emerald Lake, vanished without a trace in August of 2019. In October, a young couple, Michael and Sarah Jang, disappeared from the trail near Lake Louise. In January of 2020, another solo hiker, a man named James Hendricks, vanished from a trail system near Moraine Lake. Then in April, a woman named Catherine Mills disappeared while hiking near the Paradise Valley area. 5 disappearances within a 9-month period. All of them experienced hikers or climbers. All of them on well-established trails. All of them in locations within a radius of approximately 30 kilometers. All of them without any explanation or evidence of what had occurred. The RCMP launched a formal investigation. They interviewed families and friends. They examined equipment. They searched the region exhaustively. They found no evidence of foul play. They found no bodies. They found no sign of struggle. They theorized that the hikers had become disoriented and fallen to their deaths in remote areas where their bodies had not yet been located. But the more I participated in the search efforts, the less I believed that theory. During one search, operation in June of 2020, I was exploring a section of trail near a cliff formation known as the Precipice. The area rises approximately 1,000 feet above the valley floor. The cliff edge is a dangerous location, and hikers are warned to maintain appropriate distance from the edge. As I was surveying the cliff area with my search partner, another volunteer named Thomas, I observed something unusual on the ground. The earth near the cliff edge appeared to have been disturbed, but not randomly disturbed. The disturbance formed a precise pattern. Small stones and dirt had been arranged in concentric circles. The pattern was identical to patterns I had observed in other locations during our search efforts. Each of the 5 missing hikers had been searched for in areas where these circular patterns appeared. Thomas and I photographed the pattern and reported our findings to the search coordinator. The coordinator suggested that the patterns were simply natural formations caused by wind or water erosion. But the patterns were too regular, too precise, too consistent in their geometric properties. These were not natural formations. I began to study the disappearance locations more carefully. I mapped each location where hikers had vanished. I then created a map showing the locations of the circular stone patterns that we had discovered. The patterns formed a shape. The 5 disappearance locations, when connected by lines, created a perfect pentagon. The circular stone patterns were positioned at each point of the pentagon. The geometric precision was undeniable. I presented my findings to the search and rescue coordinator. She listened to my analysis carefully. Then she told me something that changed everything. She told me that the previous search and rescue coordinator, a man named David Whitmore, had conducted similar analyses. He had identified the same geographical pattern. He had brought his findings to the attention of the RCMP and to the provincial government. And shortly after presenting his findings, David Whitmore had disappeared while conducting a solo search operation in the same geographic area. My coordinator explained that after David Whitmore's disappearance, there had been an informal agreement among the search and rescue leadership to maintain cautious distance from the cliff region, to respond to emergency calls if necessary, but to avoid conducting solo search operations in the high-altitude cliff areas, to accept certain mysteries as unsolvable. I was horrified. I argued that we had a responsibility to investigate further, to determine what was causing these disappearances. My coordinator told me something that I will never forget. She told me that sometimes certain places on Earth are meant to remain undisturbed. She told me that the mountains have their own logic, their own governance. She told me that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. I ignored her warning. In August of 2020, I organized an expedition to investigate the cliff region more thoroughly. I recruited 2 other volunteers, both experienced mountaineers named Marcus and Jennifer. We planned a 3-day expedition with comprehensive surveying equipment. We intended to map the cliff region in detail and to search for any evidence that might explain the disappearances. We established a base camp at the edge of the cliff region. We set up tents and established communication equipment. We conducted ground surveys during daylight hours. On the first day, we discovered additional stone patterns. We discovered markings on the cliff face itself, deep scratches and etchings that appeared to be decades old. The markings seemed to form symbols or letters, but they were in no language I recognized. On the second day, I noticed something that disturbed me profoundly. The missing hikers' photographs, which had been distributed throughout the region during search efforts, seemed to appear in unusual locations within the cliff area. I found a photograph of David Caldwell placed on a rock shelf facing the cliff edge. I found a photograph of Maria Gonzalez positioned on a ledge approximately 300 feet above the valley floor. The photographs were weathered and aged, as if they had been exposed to the elements for months or years. But they had not been in those locations during my searches. They appeared to have been placed there intentionally between my previous searches and this current expedition. That night, as we sat around the fire at our base camp, Marcus mentioned that he had been hearing unusual sounds. Sounds like voices, he said, coming from the direction of the cliff. The sounds seemed to be calling his name. Jennifer and I had also heard the sounds, though we had not mentioned them to each other. We had been hesitant to acknowledge what we had been hearing, fearing that to speak of it would somehow make it more real. We decided to pack our equipment and abandoned the expedition early. We decided to return to civilization, but as we were gathering our gear, Jennifer stepped too close to the cliff edge. She lost her footing on loose stone. She began to fall. Marcus and I reached for her simultaneously. Marcus managed to grab her arm and pull her back from the edge, but in that moment, as Jennifer hung suspended between falling and being saved, I saw something that I have tried for years to forget. I saw figures standing at the cliff edge, figures that appeared to be human, but that moved in ways that human beings do not move. Their joints seemed to bend at wrong angles, their heads tilted at impossible angles. They appeared to be watching Jennifer with an intensity that was almost palpable. And for a brief moment, I could have sworn that they were disappointed when Marcus pulled Jennifer back from the edge. We fled that location immediately. We drove through the night, not stopping until we reached the town of Canmore, approximately 100 kilometers away. We reported nothing to the authorities. We filed no official report about what we had experienced. Jennifer retired from search and rescue operations entirely. She moved to Alberta and took a position in a different profession. She refused to speak about the expedition afterward. Marcus attempted to report what we had observed to the provincial police, but he was met with the same skepticism and dismissal that had characterized all previous investigations of the disappearances. His credibility was questioned. He was suggested to seek psychological evaluation. He eventually abandoned his efforts to report the incident and accepted the silence that had surrounded the cliff region for years. But the cliff region continues to demand attention. Every summer, there is at least one disappearance of a hiker or climber in the area surrounding the precipice. The cases remain officially unsolved. The search and rescue team responds to calls, but with a kind of resignation, understanding that certain hikers will never be found alive. 3 months ago, I received a package in the mail. It contained a single photograph. The photograph showed me standing at the cliff edge during our expedition in August of 2020. The photograph showed me standing in a position where I had never stood, a position that would have been extremely dangerous. The photograph appeared to have been taken from a vantage point that I cannot explain. It showed me clearly, unmistakably, standing at the edge of a drop that would certainly have resulted in my death. On the back of the photograph, a message was written in handwriting I did not recognize. "You belong with us." The cliff remembers. The cliff is always watching. One day, you will answer the calling. I have not returned to search and rescue operations. I have not ventured into the mountain regions. I have not hiked. I have not camped. I have chosen instead to remain in lowland areas, far from the high cliffs and mountain peaks. But I still hear the sounds. I still hear voices calling my name in my sleep. I still wake with the feeling that something is watching me through my window. And every summer, when the hiking season begins, I feel a pull toward those mountains. A compulsion that I have to actively resist. A hunger that seems to emanate from the cliff region itself, calling to me across the distance, waiting for the moment when my resistance will fail. I know that one day I will return to the cliff. I know that one day I will answer the calling that I hear in my dreams. And I know that when that day comes, I will not return to the valleys below. My name is Edward, and I have worked as a night shift supervisor at the Riverside Paper Mill in New Brunswick for 21 years. The facility is located in the town of Grand Falls, approximately 130 kilometers northeast of Fredericton. The mill has been operational since 1925, making it one of the oldest continuously operating paper manufacturing facilities in eastern Canada. The mill employs approximately 400 workers across 3 shifts. My responsibility includes overseeing approximately 90 workers during the night shift, managing production schedules, and ensuring that safety protocols are maintained. The mill is an enormous facility. Multiple interconnected buildings span several acres. There are vast machinery rooms, chemical processing areas, storage facilities, and administrative offices. I have worked there for long enough that I know the facility intimately. I have memorized the layout of every corridor. I have learned the sounds that the machinery makes during normal operation. I have developed an intuitive sense for when something is wrong within that facility. But there is one section of the mill that I have never become comfortable with. It is located in the basement of Building C, an older structure that dates to the original 1925 construction. The section is designated on facility maps as Storage Sector 9. According to the current records, it is used for the storage of archived materials and obsolete equipment. Workers are rarely assigned to that section. Maintenance of that area is minimal. The section remains largely undisturbed. In March of 2019, I began to notice something unusual about that sector. During my routine nighttime inspections of the facility, I would pass near the sealed doors of Storage Sector 9. On several occasions, I observed that the temperature in the hallway adjacent to the sector seemed to fluctuate dramatically. I would feel cold air emanating from beneath the doors. Then, within minutes, the temperature would become uncomfortably warm. This temperature fluctuation occurred regardless of the season or the ambient temperature outside the facility. I mentioned these observations to my colleague, a man named Robert, who had worked at the mill for 18 years. Robert's response was unusual. He became noticeably uncomfortable. He told me that I should not concern myself with Storage Sector 9. He told me that that sector had always been peculiar. He told me that the previous night shift supervisors had learned to simply avoid the area as much as possible. I was intrigued by Robert's vague warnings. I requested access to the historical records of Storage Sector 9. The documentation was sparse and fragmentary. The sector had been created during the original construction of the mill in 1925. It had been used, according to the records, for storage of industrial chemicals and materials. Over the decades, its use had changed multiple times. The most recent documentation suggested that it was simply an archive storage area with minimal ongoing activity. But I found something else in the archived records, a note dated 1987, written by a previous mill manager named Thomas Blackwell. The note was brief, but it contained an unusual observation. It read, "Sector 9 remains problematic. Recommend continued containment protocols. Equipment failures occur with unusual frequency in this area. Time tracking in the sector is inconsistent. Recommend minimal staff rotation through this area. Sector appears to have developed independent temporal properties." Temporal properties. The phrase troubled me. I did not understand what he meant, but the implication was disturbing. In May of 2019, I made the decision to enter Storage Sector 9 personally. I was prepared to experience unusual temperature fluctuations. I was not prepared for what actually occurred. I unlocked the sealed doors and entered the sector. The interior was dimly lit by old fluorescent panels that flickered intermittently. The air was stale and carried a smell I could not identify, something between industrial chemicals and decay. The sector was larger than I'd expected, extending much further back than the exterior dimensions of Building C would logically allow. Shelving units held boxes and containers, many of them covered with decades of dust. I began to walk deeper into the sector, noting the layout and cataloging the contents of the storage areas. But after what I estimated to be approximately 10 minutes of walking, I realized something was wrong. I had walked much further than should have been possible given the physical dimensions of the building. The sector seemed to extend indefinitely, larger on the inside than it should have been on the outside. I decided to return to the entrance. I retraced my steps, but I could not find the entrance. I walked in what I believed was the correct direction, but the shelving units and containers appeared to be in different locations than I remembered. The layout of the sector seemed to have rearranged itself while I was walking through it. I remained calm and continued walking in the direction I believed led to the entrance. After what I estimated to be another 10 minutes, I encountered a clock mounted on one of the shelving units. The clock read 2:37 a.m. I checked my watch. My watch indicated that it was 2:51 a.m. The clocks disagreed about the current time. Approximately 14 minutes of discrepancy. I continued walking and I finally located the entrance. I exited storage sector 9 and checked the time again. The hallway clock indicated 3:16 a.m. Approximately 39 minutes had passed since I entered the sector, but according to my physical memory of the experience, I had been inside the sector for approximately 20 minutes. I reported nothing to my supervisors. I simply documented the incident in my personal notes and attempted to move forward with my work. But the anomalies continued to occur. On multiple occasions, workers assigned to routine maintenance tasks in areas adjacent to Storage Sector 9 reported experiencing time distortions. One worker, a man named David, reported that he had been performing a routine inspection task that should have taken approximately 30 minutes. He completed the task and returned to report to me. According to the hallway clocks, 4 hours had passed. David was bewildered. He was certain that only 30 minutes had elapsed. Another worker, a woman named Sarah, reported an even more disturbing experience. She had been assigned to perform an inventory check in a storage area adjacent to Sector 9. She completed her work and returned to submit her findings. But the inventory she had completed did not match any previous records. She had documented products that had not existed for decades. She had recorded prices in currency denominations that were no longer in circulation. She had written the date as 1987, despite being aware that it was 2019. I began to conduct research into the history of Storage Sector 9. I accessed archived newspapers from the town of Grand Falls. I found an article from 1927, just 2 years after the mill's construction. The article described unusual incidents at the facility. Workers reported experiencing missing time. They reported feeling disoriented after spending time in certain areas of the mill. They reported seeing things that did not make sense, images or events that seemed to occupy the same location as their current surroundings. The article suggested that management attributed these incidents to psychological stress from working in an industrial environment. But then, in 1989, I found a more detailed account. A worker named James Whitmore had been assigned to perform maintenance work in Storage Sector 9. He worked for approximately 2 hours. When he exited the sector, he appeared to be in a state of severe psychological distress. He babbled incoherently. His hair had turned completely white, despite being a man in his 30s. He was hospitalized. According to the newspaper account, he never fully recovered. He spent the remaining years of his life in a psychiatric facility, repeating fragments of phrases that made no sense, describing events that seemed to be from different time periods. Then, in 1991, James Whitmore died in the psychiatric facility. But according to the autopsy report, which I found in the archived mill records, there was something unusual about his remains. The pathologist noted that Whitmore's body showed signs of accelerated aging, consistent with someone in their 80s or 90s, not a man in his 50s. The pathologist could not explain the discrepancy. I became obsessed with understanding what was happening in Storage Sector 9. I theorized that the sector contained some kind of temporal anomaly, a location where time operated according to different rules than the normal universe. I theorized that this anomaly had existed since the construction of the sector, perhaps caused by some geological or geographical property of the location. In September of 2019, I made a deliberate decision to spend an extended period of time inside Storage Sector 9. I wanted to document the temporal distortions more carefully. I brought a video camera. I brought multiple watches and timing devices. I prepared myself psychologically for what I might experience. I entered Storage Sector 9 at 11:47 p.m. I documented the ambient conditions. I began walking through the sector, recording observations on my camera. I noted the layout of the shelving units. I noted the contents of the storage areas. I maintained a running commentary about the time as displayed on various clocks throughout the sector. What I experienced over the following hours cannot be adequately described in words. The sector seemed to loop. I would walk through a particular corridor, observe specific shelving units, and document specific items. Then, approximately 15 minutes later, I would encounter the exact same corridor again. The same items, the same shelving units, the exact same configuration. But each time I encountered the loop, something was slightly different. A clock would show a different time. A box would be positioned in a different location. A worker would be standing in the corner where no one had been before. But the worker disturbed me most profoundly. The first time I encountered the worker, he was standing near a shelf, observing me silently. He was dressed in clothing from the 1950s. He appeared to be in his 30s. The second time I encountered the loop, he was still there, but he appeared to be older, perhaps in his 50s. Each time the loop repeated, the worker aged. By the 7th repetition, the worker appeared to be in his 80s, ancient and decrepit. By the 10th repetition, the worker was simply a skeleton, still standing in the same position. I stopped recording. I abandoned my research. I ran toward what I believed to be the exit. My sense of direction was completely disoriented. I moved through corridors that seemed to shift and change around me. Eventually, I emerged from Storage Sector 9 and found myself in the familiar hallway adjacent to the sector. I checked my watch and the hallway clock. They disagreed on the current time by approximately 4 hours. According to my watch, I had been inside the sector for approximately 54 minutes. According to the hallway clock, more than 4 hours had passed. I have never reviewed the video camera footage from that night. The device malfunctioned while I was in the sector. The footage is corrupted beyond recovery. I have never entered Storage Sector 9 again, but I remain aware that it exists. I remain aware that something exists within that sector that defies the laws of time and physics as I understand them. And I remain aware that the worker who aged and died within those repeating loops may not have been a hallucination or a manifestation of temporal distortion. He may have been a worker from decades past, trapped in a loop, repeating the same experience across multiple decades while experiencing it all consecutively, aging a lifetime in what, from an external perspective, took only days or weeks. Last month, I received a package at my home. It contained a single photograph. The photograph showed the interior of Storage Sector 9. In the background of the photograph, there was a worker standing near a shelf. The worker was me. I was wearing the clothes I had worn the night I entered the sector, but the photograph was dated 1987. It showed me standing in the sector more than 30 years ago, before I was even born. On the back of the photograph, a message was written. Some people belong in the loop. You were meant to join us. One shift, you will stay longer. One shift, you will not return. One shift, you will become the watcher that greets the next one who enters. I have put in for a transfer to the day shift. My request has been denied. The mill administration has determined that I am too valuable as a night shift supervisor. They have refused to approve my transfer. I have only 3 more nights until I am scheduled to work again. I am terrified of returning to that facility, but I know that I will return. I know that I will eventually enter Storage Sector 9 again, and I know that this time I may not emerge at all. My name is Holly, and I host a true crime podcast called The Archived Unknown, which focuses on unsolved disappearances and cold cases from across Canada. I have been producing the podcast for 4 years. I have 214 episodes published. The show has developed a dedicated following of approximately 83,000 regular listeners. My research methodology is thorough. I conduct extensive interviews with family members, investigators, and experts. I examine police reports, autopsy findings, and forensic evidence. I pride myself on presenting factual information supported by documented sources. 3 years ago, I became interested in a particular case. A family named the Rothschilds disappeared from their home in Alberta in 1995. The family consisted of 4 members: Marcus, aged 38, Jennifer, aged 34, and 2 children, Thomas and Rebecca, aged 12 and 9 respectively. On the evening of August 15, 1995, the family simply vanished from their locked home. The doors were locked from the inside. The windows were secured. There was no sign of forced entry, no ransom notes, no evidence of struggle. The family was simply gone. The police investigation of the case was thorough, but ultimately unsuccessful. The investigators found no evidence of kidnapping, murder, or voluntary relocation. The family was eventually listed as missing, presumed dead, though no bodies were ever recovered. The case went cold, and after decades, it became one of the hundreds of unsolved disappearances in Canadian history. But something about the case fascinated me. I decided to investigate it for my podcast. I contacted the original investigating officer, a retired detective named Robert Graham. Robert agreed to participate in an interview. During our conversation, he told me something that surprised me. He told me that he had advised the family to leave the home. He told me that he had personally recommended that they relocate to a different residence. When I asked why, he became visibly uncomfortable. He told me that the home itself seemed to be the source of the family's problems. He told me that strange phenomena had been occurring in the home for weeks prior to their disappearance. Robert expanded on his observations. He described how the family had reported that objects moved on their own when no one was present. They reported that doors would lock and unlock without explanation. They reported that they would lose time frequently, experiencing gaps in their memories where hours would pass, but they could account for only minutes. Robert told me that he had visited the home on multiple occasions and had witnessed some of these phenomena himself. He had documented his observations in his personal notes, but the official police report made no mention of these supernatural elements. I became consumed by the Rothschild case. I researched the history of the home. I discovered that it had been constructed in 1987 on land that had previously been left vacant for decades. The property had a strange history. Multiple previous structures built on the land had been abandoned. Families had moved away. The land seemed to possess an unusual quality that drove residents away. I decided to attempt to purchase the home myself. I wanted to investigate it personally. I wanted to understand what had caused the Rothschild family to vanish. After months of legal proceedings, I was able to obtain ownership of the property. I moved into the home in January of 2022. The first month was uneventful. I established my home office and began working on my podcast from the property. I conducted interviews with family members of the Rothschilds and other people connected to the case. The home seemed normal, ordinary. There was nothing obviously unusual about the structure or the location. But in February of 2022, things changed. I began to experience phenomena that matched the descriptions provided by the Rothschild family. Objects would move. I would leave my keys on the kitchen counter and find them in the bedroom. I would leave a coffee mug on my desk and find it in the bathroom. The movements were not violent or aggressive. They were subtle and deliberate, as if someone was playing with me. Then I began to lose time. I would sit down to work on my podcast at 2 p.m. and suddenly realize that it was 7 p.m. 5 hours would have passed in what felt like 30 minutes. I would have no memory of those 5 hours. My work on the podcast would be complete. My research would be organized. But I could not account for how I had spent that time. It was as if someone had worked while I was absent from my own consciousness. Then I discovered the video recordings. I had set up security cameras throughout the home. When I reviewed the footage from one evening, I discovered something horrifying. The footage showed me moving through the home during the 5 hours I could not account for. But the person on the footage was not moving like I move. The movements were jerky and unnatural. The person's head tilted at impossible angles. The person's arms moved in ways that human arms could not move. It looked like I was being controlled by something that did not understand how to properly operate a human body. I became terrified. I wanted to leave the home immediately, but something compelled me to stay. Something in the home itself seemed to be holding me there, preventing me from leaving. I attempted to pack my belongings and depart, but every time I prepared to leave, I would become physically ill. Intense nausea and dizziness would overcome me. I would have to sit down. I would rest for a moment, and when I recovered, I would have lost the motivation to leave. I would convince myself that I needed to stay, that my research was too important to abandon. In March of 2022, I discovered something in the basement of the home. There was a sealed room, hidden behind a false wall. I found the entrance by accident when a section of the wall collapsed. Behind it was a room that was not shown on any official blueprints of the home. Inside the room, I found filing cabinets. I found decades worth of documentation. The files contained detailed accounts of disappearances, going back to at least 1987. The files contained personal information about families, information about the phenomena they had experienced in the home, information about their disappearances. The files contained photographs of families smiling, taken from angles that suggested the photographs had been taken without the family's knowledge, photographs of families sleeping in their beds, photographs of families engaged in private moments of distress, photographs of the moment of their disappearance, captured as if someone had been documenting the events as they occurred. I found a file labeled Rothschild Family. The file contained detailed documentation of Marcus, Jennifer, Thomas, and Rebecca. It contained photographs of them taken from inside their home. It contained journal entries written in handwriting I did not recognize, describing the family's behavior, their routines, their fears. The final entry, dated August 15th, 1995, read, "The family is ready, as the transition is prepared. Tonight, they will understand." I found the file labeled Holly, my file. Inside, there was documentation of my research process, detailed descriptions of my podcast production, photographs of me at various locations taken from angles that suggested someone was observing me without my knowledge, journal entries describing my actions, my thoughts, my motivations, all written in the same handwriting as the Rothschild file. The most recent entry, dated just one day before, read, "The new one is ready. She has opened the doors and allowed the knowledge to enter. Soon she will make the transition. Soon she will understand." I fled the home in terror. I drove through the night. I checked into a hotel and attempted to process what I had discovered. I contacted the authorities and reported everything. I provided them with copies of the files. I explained what I had found in the basement. The police investigated. They obtained a warrant and searched the home. But they found no hidden room. There was no false wall. There were no filing cabinets. There was no documentation. The room I had discovered had been completely erased. The basement wall showed no signs of collapse. It was as if the room had never existed at all. The authorities suggested that I had experienced a psychological episode. They suggested that I had hallucinated the room and the files. They questioned whether my podcast production had become too consuming, causing me to develop paranoid delusions. I do not believe I hallucinated the room. I do not believe I imagined the files. But I cannot prove that they existed. I no longer have any evidence. The home has returned to its normal, ordinary appearance. I discontinued my podcast. I could not continue investigating disappearances when I was no longer certain of my own sanity. I moved away from the home. I moved away from Alberta entirely. I now live in Nova Scotia, as far from that cursed property as I could travel within Canada. But the files continue to appear in my home. I receive packages containing individual pages from the case files. Each page contains information about a different missing person. Each page contains photographs and documentation that I did not create. Each page is marked with a handwritten note stating, She is not finished. The research continues. The transition is not yet complete. Last week, I received a package containing something new. It contained a video file stored on a USB drive. I was hesitant to open the file, but my morbid curiosity overwhelmed my caution. I opened the file. The video showed the interior of the Rothschild home on August 15, 1995. It showed the family sitting in their living room. It showed them becoming aware of a presence that I could not see. It showed them trying to escape, trying to run toward the doors and windows. It showed them being unable to move, their bodies frozen by something outside my perception. It showed them standing frozen as their bodies began to change, to transform into something else, something that was not human. And then the video cut to footage of the present day. It showed me walking through the home in Alberta. It showed my body moving in that jerky, unnatural way. It showed me looking directly at the camera with an expression of complete detachment. The final frame of the video contained text that read, "The transition continues. The cycle repeats. Soon there will be another. Soon there will be another. Soon." I have not recorded a podcast episode in 11 months. I have not investigated any cold cases. I no longer discuss the Rothschild family or any other disappearance case. I live in complete isolation, avoiding contact with other people, terrified that the compulsion to return to the home will overwhelm my resistance. But I know that one day, the compulsion will become too strong. One day, I will return to that home. One day, I will walk through those doors willingly. And I know that when I do, I will never walk back out again. My name is Samuel, and I have worked as a geological surveyor for the past 27 years. My specialization is in subsurface mapping and mineral resource assessment. I have worked throughout Canada, from British Columbia to Nova Scotia, conducting surveys of underground geological formations, cave systems, and mineral deposits. In 2019, I was contracted by a private mining company to conduct a comprehensive survey of the subsurface geology in the Yukon Territory, specifically in the region surrounding the town of Mayo. The region had been known for gold and silver deposits for over a century. The company wanted to assess the viability of reopening mining operations in the area. My contract included creating detailed maps of the underground cave systems, identifying mineral concentrations, and determining the structural integrity of potential mining sites. I was provided with state-of-the-art surveying equipment and was given full access to the mining company's facilities and historical records. The work began in May of 2019. I established a base camp near the mining site and began my preliminary surveys. The geology of the region was fascinating. Multiple cave systems existed throughout the area, some of which had been partially explored by previous surveyors, but many of which remained largely unmapped. Over the course of several weeks, I documented the locations and dimensions of numerous cave passages and underground chambers. But in July of 2019, I discovered something unusual. While conducting a survey of a cave system that had been marked on historical maps as explored, I located a section of cave passage that did not appear on any official records. The passage was approximately 12 feet in height and 8 feet in width, and it appeared to lead deeper into the earth in a direction that was not consistent with the previously mapped cave system. According to my company supervisor, I was instructed to mark the location and continue with my assigned surveying work. But I was curious. I decided to explore the passage further, extending my surveying work beyond my official assignments. I documented the passage with my surveying equipment, creating detailed maps as I moved deeper into the mountain. After approximately 200 meters of surveying through the passage, I encountered a massive underground chamber. The chamber was enormous, far larger than any natural cave formation I had encountered previously. The ceiling rose approximately 200 feet above the chamber floor. The chamber extended for hundreds of meters in all directions, too large to accurately determine its full dimensions with my available equipment. But what truly disturbed me was what I found on the chamber floor. The chamber was not empty. It contained structures, artificial structures, primitive construction consisting of materials that appeared to be stone and wood arranged in deliberate patterns. The structures resembled dwellings or shelters, though they were unlike any dwelling structures I had encountered in my years of archaeological observation. I documented everything with my surveying equipment. I took photographs and created precise measurements of the chamber and its contents. Then I collected samples of the structures for analysis. After several hours of exploration and documentation, I returned to my base camp and reported my findings to my company supervisor. My supervisor was initially skeptical. He told me that my findings were impossible. Underground chambers of such size do not simply exist without being previously documented. He told me to cease exploration of the unmarked passage and to focus on my assigned surveying work. But he also agreed to send a team to the location to verify my findings. When the verification team arrived at the location of the passage entrance, they found nothing. The passage I had documented did not exist. The cave wall was solid. There was no opening. There was no passage leading to the chamber. The surveyors examined the area thoroughly with their equipment, but they found no evidence that any passage had ever existed at the location I had identified. I was bewildered. I provided the company with my detailed survey documentation, my photographs, and my measurements. All of my equipment data confirmed that I had explored a massive chamber and documented artificial structures. But the physical location showed no evidence that any such chamber existed. The company leadership suggested that my surveying equipment had malfunctioned, providing false readings and fabricated data. They suggested that I had experienced some form of psychological episode brought on by isolation and overwork. They terminated my contract and requested that I return to Whitehorse immediately. I was devastated by this outcome. I had documented everything carefully and professionally, but I had no physical evidence except for the digital data, which could allegedly have been corrupted or fabricated. I returned to Whitehorse, but I could not accept that my findings had been dismissed so easily. I decided to return to the mining site and explore further. I did this without company authorization. In September of 2019, I drove back to the mining region and established a personal base camp. I hired local guides to assist me in navigating the terrain. I explained to them that I was conducting research on the region's geological history. The local guides were reluctant to help me. They seemed uncomfortable with my presence in the region. When I pressed them for explanations, they eventually told me something that changed everything. They told me that the underground had long been known to the local indigenous population as a place where people should not go. They told stories of ancestors who had ventured underground and never returned. They spoke of an underground civilization that existed beneath the mountains, a civilization that was ancient and not fully human. The guides refused to accompany me into the cave systems, but they provided me with directions to locations where I might find additional entrances to the underground passages. Using their guidance, I located 3 additional access points to underground cave systems. I explored each location carefully, documenting everything with my personal surveying equipment. At the 3rd location, I found what I had been searching for. I found another massive underground chamber. This chamber was similar in scale to the chamber I had discovered previously, and it contained structures, hundreds of structures. Primitive dwellings arranged in what appeared to be a deliberate settlement pattern. The structures covered an area of at least 500 meters in all directions, but what truly horrified me was the discovery of human remains. Scattered throughout the settlement area were bones, skeletal remains of multiple individuals arranged in groups and clusters. Some of the remains appeared to be centuries old. Others appeared to be far more recent, perhaps only years old. I documented everything meticulously. I collected samples of bone material for carbon dating. I created detailed maps of the settlement layout, and I discovered something else. Among the remains, I found artifacts, metal objects bearing inscriptions. Some of the inscriptions appeared to be in languages I did not recognize. Some appeared to be in modern English, dated to recent decades. One artifact was particularly disturbing. It was a leather journal, partially preserved by the dry underground environment. The journal contained dated entries spanning approximately 15 years, from 2004 to 2019. The entries described a community of people living underground. The journal detailed daily activities, social structures, and the careful maintenance of the underground civilization. But the entries also described something else. The journal detailed the arrival of new members to the community. The entries referred to this process as recruitment. The journal described how individuals would be led underground and would eventually accept membership in the underground community. The journal noted that most recruits eventually adapted to underground existence and became productive members of the settlement. The final entry in the journal was dated August 2019, only weeks before my discovery. The entry was brief. It read, "Another surveyor has found us. He has documented the chamber. He will be dealt with." The circle continues. I fled the chamber immediately. I returned to my base camp and collected all of my equipment. I drove through the night to Whitehorse and reported everything to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The RCMP conducted an investigation. A team of officers was sent to the mining region. They attempted to locate the underground chamber I had identified, but they found nothing. No cave passages, no structures, no human remains, no artifacts. The location I had marked showed only solid rock and normal geological formations. The RCMP suggested that I had fabricated evidence or experienced a psychological episode. They noted that my previous employer had already expressed concerns about my mental stability. They offered me the contact information for mental health professionals and suggested that I seek treatment. But I know what I found. I know that beneath the Yukon Mountains, there exists an underground civilization. I know that people have been taken there across decades. I know that they have been forced to remain, living lives cut off from the surface world, existing in darkness. 2 months ago, I received a package at my residence in Whitehorse. It contained a single item, a journal. I recognized it immediately as the journal I had discovered in the underground chamber. But this journal was not centuries old. It was new. It had been written recently. The handwriting was my own. The journal contains entries dated from 2020 through 2025. Entries written in the future, describing my life as it will be lived underground. Entries describing how I will eventually surrender my resistance and accept membership in the underground community. Entries describing how I will eventually bring others to the community, fulfilling the same recruitment role that others have filled before me. The final entry in the journal is dated November of 2025. It reads, "The final stage approaches. The transition cannot be delayed any longer. Soon, Samuel will come to understand the truth. Soon, he will descend and never return to the surface world. And another surveyor will eventually find us, and the cycle will continue forever." I'm terrified of that journal. I'm terrified of what it represents. I am terrified of the suggestion that my future has already been written, that my eventual descent into the underground is predetermined and inevitable. But I'm also aware that I am increasingly drawn toward the Northern Territories. I am aware that I have started researching mining surveys in the Yukon. I am aware that I have begun to make plans to return to the region where I made my discovery. And I am afraid that no matter how much I resist, I will eventually find myself descending into the darkness beneath those mountains. And I am afraid that I will not be alone. My name is Evie, and I serve as the Heritage Site Coordinator for the historic village of New Scotland, located on Prince Edward Island. The village is a restored settlement from the 19th century, maintained as a living museum and educational facility. The village consists of approximately 23 structures built between 1867 and 1901, including homes, a church, a school, a general store, and various outbuildings. My responsibilities include maintaining the historical accuracy of the site, conducting tours for visitors, and documenting the history of the families who lived in the village during its period of occupation. I have held this position for 8 years. I have developed extensive knowledge about the village and the people who inhabited it. I have collected historical documents, letters, photographs, and artifacts related to the residents. I have conducted interviews with descendants of the original village families. The work has been deeply fulfilling, allowing me to preserve the memory of lives lived more than a century ago. But approximately 2 years ago, something began to change at the village site. In the spring of 2023, the board of directors commissioned the installation of security cameras throughout the facility. The decision was made to improve safety and to discourage vandalism. Night vision cameras were installed in strategic locations throughout the village. The footage was recorded continuously and stored on secure servers. I was given access to review the footage at any time. In June of 2023, I reviewed the security footage from the previous evening out of routine curiosity. What I observed on the footage disturbed me profoundly. The cameras had captured images of people moving through the village during the night, between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m. The people appeared to be dressed in 19th century clothing. They moved with purpose through the village structures. They appeared to be engaging in routine daily activities, cooking, cleaning, and socializing, all occurring in the darkness when no visitors or staff members were present. I reviewed additional nights of footage. The phenomenon occurred consistently. Every night between midnight and approximately 4 a.m., the village was inhabited by people dressed in period clothing who moved through the structures as if they were engaged in normal daily life. I reported my observations to the board of directors. I provided them with footage showing the phenomena. The board's response was skepticism. They suggested that the camera system was malfunctioning. They suggested that shadows and reflections were creating an illusion of figures moving through the structures. They recommended that I have the security system professionally evaluated. I arranged for a technician to evaluate the system. The technician found no malfunctions. The cameras were operating normally. The night vision sensors were functioning properly. The footage I had observed was genuine footage captured by functioning equipment. The board remained unconvinced. They suggested that the phenomena could have a rational explanation, perhaps stray animals or transient individuals moving through the property. They recommended that I maintain the existing security protocols, but that I cease investigating the nighttime phenomena further. But I could not cease my investigation. I became obsessed with understanding what was occurring at the village site. I began to spend nights at the site, remaining awake and observing the phenomena firsthand. Beginning in August of 2023, I stationed myself in different locations throughout the village each night, positioned to directly observe the nighttime activity. What I witnessed was beyond my comprehension. I observed people moving through the village, people dressed in authentic 19th century clothing, people who appeared completely corporeal and real. They moved with purpose and intentionality. They engaged in conversations that I could not quite hear, but that suggested normal social interaction. They entered structures and emerged hours later. They worked, they socialized, they attended to what appeared to be routine tasks of daily existence. But they did not acknowledge my presence. Even when I directly confronted them, even when I spoke to them and attempted to establish communication, they remained unaware of me. It was as if I existed in a different reality from them, visible to each other but unable to interact. I began to catalog the individuals I observed. I documented their descriptions, their clothing, and the routines they seemed to perform. I began to recognize specific individuals appearing night after night. There was a man who appeared to be in his 50s, who performed maintenance tasks on various structures each night. There was a woman in her 30s who collected water from the well with the same routine night after night. There were children who played in the central square, their games repeating identically on each subsequent evening. I researched the historical records of the village. I examined documents dating from 1867 onward. I found descriptions of residents that matched the individuals I was observing. The man who performed maintenance tasks appeared to match the description of Thomas Caldwell, a blacksmith and carpenter who had lived in the village from 1869 until his death in 1903. The woman who collected water matched descriptions of Catherine MacLeod, who had lived in the village from 1875 to 1927. The children matched descriptions from historical records of residents born in the 1880s. The individuals I was observing were not contemporary people dressed in period costumes. They were manifestations of people who had lived in the village more than a century ago. They were ghosts or spirits, or some form of residual consciousness that had remained attached to the physical location of the village. In October of 2023, something unchanged. I was positioned outside the church building when I observed the man I had identified as Thomas Caldwell approaching me directly. For the first time, he appeared to be aware of my presence. He looked directly at me. He attempted to speak. Though his voice was barely audible, he seemed to be trying to communicate something of great importance. I moved toward him, but as I approached, he seemed to become distressed. He attempted to move away from me, but his movement was sluggish, as if he was moving through water. His form seemed to flicker, to destabilize, as if my proximity was causing him to lose cohesion. Then he simply ceased to exist. He vanished from my perception entirely. After this encounter, I began to understand something crucial. I understood that the individuals I was observing could perceive me only under specific circumstances. I understood that my presence was somehow dangerous to them, that my proximity threatened their continued existence in this location. I understood that if I remained at the site and continued to observe them and interact with them, I would eventually disrupt whatever mechanism was allowing them to maintain their presence in the village. I made a decision. I decided to protect the residents of New Scotland Village. I decided to cease my investigations and to stop attempting to communicate with the nighttime visitors. I began to spend less time at the site. I reduced my security camera reviews. I attempted to minimize my engagement with the phenomena, but the decision came too late. By November of 2023, I began to notice that the nightly phenomena were changing. The number of visitors was declining. The routines they performed were becoming less distinct, less organized. Some nights, I would observe only a handful of figures, fragmented and indistinct. Other nights, I would observe nothing at all, and I began to receive communications. Written messages would appear on my desk at the site coordinator's office. The messages were written in 19th century handwriting, using archaic language patterns. The messages expressed confusion and distress. One message read, "The watcher comes and disturbs the remembrance. The place grows empty. The memory fades." Another message read, "We cannot endure the observation. We are dissolving. You have done this." In December of 2023, the nightly phenomena ceased entirely. The security cameras no longer captured any evidence of nighttime visitors to the village. The structures remained empty after dark. The village became just a physical location, stripped of the supernatural presence that had inhabited it for more than a century. I realized what had occurred. I realized that my investigation and observation had fundamentally altered the nature of the village site. I realized that the village had been, in some inexplicable way, a reservoir of historical memory. The residents who had lived and died in the village more than a century ago had somehow maintained a persistent presence at the location. The nightly phenomena had been their attempt to preserve their own existence through the continuation of their routines. But by observing them, by documenting them, by attempting to interact with them, I had disrupted the mechanism that maintained their presence. I had caused them to fade. I had erased them. 6 months ago, I resigned from my position. I could not remain at the site knowing what I had done. I could not face the empty village, knowing that it was empty because of my actions. But the messages continue to arrive. I receive envelopes at my home containing written communications in 19th century handwriting. The messages express forgiveness, but also warning. One recent message read, "You have learned what you should not have learned. You have destroyed what should have remained undisturbed, but do not despair. The cycle turns. The memory returns. Soon we will emerge again, and perhaps next time you will understand the importance of remaining silent." Last week, I received a package containing a photograph. The photograph shows the interior of one of the village structures. It shows residents moving through the space, but the photograph also shows me standing in the background, dressed in clothing from the 19th century. I am standing with the other residents, as if I am one of them. The photograph is dated 1887, more than a century before I was born. I understand now what is happening. I understand that by observing the village and documenting the residents, I have become entangled with the place. I understand that I have begun to merge with the historical memory of the village. I understand that I am progressively becoming one of the residents, permanently bound to the location, existing in an eternal nighttime realm beneath the surface of ordinary perception. I feel the transition occurring. During daylight hours, I'm increasingly conscious and grounded in the present day. But at night, I begin to lose awareness of contemporary existence. I begin to experience memories that are not my own, memories of living in the village during the 19th century. I begin to understand routines and relationships that belong to people who died generations ago. I know that eventually the transition will be complete. I will become fully integrated into the historical memory of the village. I will become one of the residents who appears night after night, performing routines that have repeated for more than a century, trapped in an eternal preservation of the past. And when new visitors come to the site, when new observers attempt to understand what they see on security cameras or in glimpses of nighttime activity, I will be one of the figures they observe. I will be part of the memory that the village preserves. And I will understand, finally, the importance of remaining silent and allowing the past to exist undisturbed. The village remembers, and soon I will be remembered as part of it forever.